Ladies and gentlemen, it's a big pleasure for me to continue with this afternoon session, the fourth panel discussion, where we specifically address promoting civic participation and inclusive decision-making in European cities. And for that purpose, I would like to invite now our three physical speakers to come on the stage. And it is a big pleasure as well to have two virtual speakers with us as well. While they're coming on the stage, please provide them with a round of applause. We're really pleased to have you all with us. It is again a big pleasure to have you here. We have now also our two virtual speakers on the screen. Good afternoon to you as well. In this specific panel discussion, we are going to address the local level. Policies and partnerships on the local level are particularly important, as it was already addressed earlier this morning as well, to facilitate inclusion and to combat discrimination as well. Because very often it is minority groups, and that is including refugees and migrants as well, that are targeted by specific groups. And when there are local initiatives on the urban level, a lot of prevention efforts can take place. It is this municipal level that we are specifically focusing on, and yet there's a lot of interaction that is going on, of course, with a departmental, national, and European level as well. We have a total of 4 different questions that we are going to address this afternoon in the next 1.5 hours that we have available. And the first question that we have is, which approaches to countering hate speech and building trust are working best? Our second question is, what practices make the difference when it comes to the aspect of participation? Our third question is, how can faith communities and local authorities improve collaboration? Here's like somewhat of an overlap, of course, with panel discussion number 3, but indeed very critical for us to include here as well. And what national or higher level policies are most needed to support the work at the municipal levels in cities on the urban level, recognizing that it's often very important to act in a certain framework. And for that, I'm very delighted to have a star panel with us. And we have Sheikh David Munir with us, the Imam of the Central Mosque of Lisbon, and so to speak, like our host this afternoon as well. We have Leonie Lewis from the United Kingdom with us, from the Cities of Faith and Community Forum, CFCF. It's a big pleasure as well that Rehman Chishti, Member of European Parliament for Gillingham and Rainham from the House of Commons in the United Kingdom, is with us. Mrs. Marianne Verthoorten, who is the President of the Board of Trustees of Multicolored Religions in Rotterdam, in the Netherlands, and as well Mr. Jasveer Singh, OBE, Vice Chair of the Faith Forum for London and Chair of City Sikhs. We are very pleased that we have various different faiths united here, as well as policymakers. We are very much looking forward to interesting discussions. And before I hand over to Sheikh David Munir, please all be prepared after the interventions that are going to last for some 5 to 7 minutes, that we're going to join to the Q&A, where we hope that we have enough time that all of your ideas are going to be included as well. Without further ado, I would like to hand over to Sheikh Munir. It's a big pleasure to have you. It is a big pleasure to be in your beautiful city. You have the floor.
Posso falar daqui? Okay. I will not speak in Portuguese so that you may not understand. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May peace of God be upon all us. It is a pleasure to be here, and thanks for the KAICIID for this invitation. And I will try to speak in 7 minutes, 5 plus 2. I will just give you a brief history, we may say that, how the Muslims in Portugal deal with these issues which was spoken. Now, the issue of refugees, for us, it is not something new. The first refugees group which came to Islamic community, it was Bosnians. Because of the war, they came to Lisbon, they came to Portugal, and the government told us, majority of them are Muslims, please take care of them. And we did, concerning education, concerning food, concerning places for prayer. And after 2 or 3 years, the war ended, and almost all of them, they went back to Bosnia. Now, we have a new issue nowadays, okay? We have the issues, for example, I'm going to tackle more about the refugees, okay, than about the integration. Islamic Community of Portugal was founded in 1968. It is not something new, and it is not something very old. From where the Muslims, they came from ex-colony, okay, from Mozambique and Guinea-Bissau. Although nowadays we have Muslims from North of Africa, we have Muslims from East Asia, etc. But the majority of them. So the question of integration, it is not in our agenda. You see, we don't ask each other, are you integrated in the society or you are not integrated? Now, the new Muslims who come to our country, we have platform already prepared for them so that they can easily be integrated. Now, when the refugees, they came, we may talk about the Iraqians and Syrians in the beginning, 3 years ago or 2 years ago or almost 4 years ago. We tried to help them according to our possibilities. But first of all, we cannot go across the help of the government. After 1.5 years, or after approximately 2 years, because when people accepted to receive the refugees, they thought after 2 years or 3 years, the war will be over and they will go back to their countries. Now, after 2-3 years, the government could not support them as they did in the beginning. So a lot of refugees, especially Muslims and non-Muslims, they knock our doors. They come to the mosque. They said, we need food. We want to go back to our country. We are abandoned. So we try our best to help them according to our possibilities. Now, as we know that, we don't live alone. So our tackle is for them to be integrated. Now, that is the faith institutions, we provide them according to our possibilities, whatever we can. We also advise them and we create conditions for them to be integrated. Now, for example, we force them, we can't say we force them, but we almost force them to learn the language, learn the culture of Portugal, so that, and respect the other faith. Because if you respect, you will be respected. If you are not accustomed to live with non-Muslims, here is different. Here we have to live together. And diversity in a society, it is something wonderful and something beneficial. From the other side, till now, we don't have any direct party, any direct hate speech, Islamophobia, openly as, unfortunately, we see in other European countries. Why? Because none of a Portuguese citizen who live in Portugal can say that the Muslims who live in Portugal are not integrated. We are a part of the society. The only difference may be because of our faith, but everything else is normal, is equal. So just to end my speech, because I still have 1 minute and 30 seconds, I'm controlling from here, Mr. Moderator. We had elections, municipality elections, okay, 2 weeks ago. Before the elections, you know, all the parties, they want to visit all the places. So they wanted to visit the mosque. And the invitation is open, everyone can visit the mosque. They said, we want to visit the mosque. We said, okay, you can come and visit the mosque. We talk to us, we tell you our problems, you listen to our problems, because the politicians before the elections are there to listen to our problems. After the elections, if they're concrete or not, it is a different situation. A right-wing party, which speaks a little about Islamophobia, which has some in it, okay? They said, we want to visit the mosque. You are welcome. So we suggested, why don't you come on a Friday? Why don't you come and assist the main prayer on Friday? So that you can have a direct contact link with how Muslims in Portugal are. They came, they visited us, so they cannot say that in Portugal we are not integrated or we are not part of the society. Just to finalize, my question to all of you, it is a question. How long we are going to receive the refugees? Till when? We received refugees from Iraq, Syria, from Afghanistan. How long we are going to receive refugees? How many more years? We are treating the sick, and we are not treating the sickness. We should all think about it. How can we create a situation so that people should not leave their countries? They are leaving their countries, there are reasons for that. How long we are going to, just to last, I have a good news. Tomorrow, we have an Afghani football female team in Portugal. I think you heard about it. The Afghani female team football are in Portugal. They are playing in the field. Tomorrow they are visiting our mosque, and they are going to have lunch with us. Almost 50 of them, they are coming. So it is an event, and we also invited the representative of the Secretary of State who was there in the first day, Dr. Claudia Pereira, who came and he spoke on the first day. We invited her, please come tomorrow to the mosque, and also receive those Afghani players. Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and thank you for listening to me. I spoke 6 minutes and 59 seconds.
Sheikh Munir, thank you so much for your intervention. Indeed, very inspiring, and it is so important what you're doing here in Portugal, in Lisbon. And I think what you're showing to us is a way of being open, inviting the majority of people, so that any kind of fear that might be in the population can be prevented in the first place. A very powerful message. Thank you. Next, I would like to hand over to Leonie Lewis in the United Kingdom. Without further ado, I hand over to you. It's really good to have you.
Thank you very much, Johannes, and thank you very much for the lovely words from Sheikh Munir. I thought I'd just spend a little bit of time explaining the context in which I'm appearing today. So I am from the Cities of Faith and Community Forum, which in itself is an offshoot of the Faith Forum for London. And my colleague Jasvir, who we are co-vice chairs together, will be shortly speaking also from London too. The Cities of Faith Communities Forum, CFCF, has a vision of promoting strategic faith and community collaboration across and between major cities in the UK and Europe, and itself was founded around 2 to 3 years ago when I visited Amsterdam, and we had a lovely chat with their city mayor, and he invited various faith representatives to understand what was going on in Europe. At that time, we have, as we still continue to do, challenges of how we accommodate and support refugees and migrants, and also a rise of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, and I think generally in countries a move to the right. So the CFCF was a direct response. And critically, what we've been aiming to try and do is to celebrate the contribution of communities where we can, but primarily to tackle extremism, hate crime, and resilience. We want to help shape and develop policies and programs which enhance integration. And we want to seek to improve the situation for migrant communities. And all this within the context of engagement between faith groups like Faith Forum for London, and like many of the groups who are with you today, city governments and institutions, in order how we can all work together to build a more inclusive and integrated city and community for us all. We have supporters from many cities in Europe, and I know a couple of my colleagues are with you now, one from Barcelona, and I think somebody's also there from Berlin. So I also want to thank KAICIID very much for their engagement with the CFCF over the last couple of years since we've been going. So I wanted to explore a couple of the questions which we've been asked to identify, particularly the one talking about the practices that make the difference when it comes to participation, and also how faith communities and local authorities can improve collaboration. I'm going to be doing this through very quickly taking you through some examples and some of my thoughts, which have primarily been evidenced around our responses, particularly in London and in the UK, and some of the couple of the webinars that we've run through CFCF, hearing your views from people, our colleagues in Europe. Basically, as far as I can see, the practices that make a difference when it comes to participation are based around trust, collaboration, open dialogue, creating safe spaces, and I would use the words, and we do it 3 times in iteration, local, local, local. Things work better when it's not national governments almost, but when they are local city municipalities and local governments making decisions, because that's much more flexible and less, I suppose, less involved with white papers and reports. I think also that we need to think about borough councils or municipalities becoming more open, being trained to be more open, collaborating with the faith and voluntary sector more fully. This was evidenced very much with the Faith Forum for London and our role, and the support that we had from the city, the mayor's office with CFCF during the pandemic. And I'll explain that very shortly. Various groups here were embraced and engaged in helping think through the best ways to support local communities through the pandemic on a wide variety of issues. Also, I think we need to think about working with making a difference to participation, that we must remember that many faith groups and harder to reach groups should be considered as being equal partners in conversations. Improving our listening skills. They need to be at the table and participating around the table. And local authorities have to understand that we can't be looking at these, as particularly with migrants and refugees and asylum seekers, as problems. They have to be solutions, and that they are to be integrated, to engage in full civic participation. And I think that's what the faith groups bring, because we've had years of practice of wanting to be responsible for one another, and knowing that together we can build more cohesive society and more comprehensive ways of feeling collaborative and engaged together. We also have to be mindful, and I think this is very important, that refugees and migrants are not a homogenous group. A group of people, we like them, are from very different faith groups and cultural groups, and it's important that we have to treat groups as such, that they are different and they have different needs and different desires, and we have to hear those to respond more fully. One of the key things that I would like to suggest is that all municipalities have on their websites a button or tab which appears, which talks about faith or talks about a particular group of people as a group, and they can access that information and can feel part of a conversation. One of the couple of things that we took on board at the CFCF over the last couple of years, in 2020, we ran a webinar and around the role that faith communities could play in rehabilitating European cities through post-COVID. And some of the experts who were on the panel, I know who have been speaking with you today and yesterday, talked about the following. There was a powerful influence and contribution to be made by the faith sector during the pandemic, and this still continues. They talked about the relevance of online positioning during the sharing of information, obviously evidenced by the fact that myself and Jasvir are online and you're face-to-face. But this is very important and significant in how we conduct meetings and how we can include people. We talked about how governments across Europe are recognising the sector not as tokenistic, but as a critical component of integration in city life. And this is very much part of the key recommendations which I would promote going forward. But we also noted that there's still much work to be done. We also noted a couple of times that the pandemic has exposed harsh inequalities for many groups and individuals, especially from the Black Afro-Caribbean communities, the Asian communities, Muslim communities, and other minority ethnic communities who are sometimes more disenfranchised. And I think there's a significant role, we said, across Europe for the sector dealing with the negative legacies of the pandemic, which sadly are with us. The rise of Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, moved to the right across Europe. So I think these things need to be tackled. One other thing I'd like to point out briefly was that in a webinar we held just this year, we talked about the role of faith in the vaccine rollout. I myself was a COVID champion working on behalf of the Ministry of Government and Local Communities together with the Faiths Forum for London. And one of the things that we discussed was that the many faith communities, and this was again repeated by certain communities in Europe who mentioned to me, were very much involved with food banks, supporting local authorities with accessing their buildings, places of worship to promote vaccines and vaccination centres. And the challenge was, which we heard from speakers in Berlin and also from Barcelona, some research which they'd conducted, was that the communities where there was more hesitancy was prevalent among minority religious and ethnic groups. There was also a history here of marginalisation. And the areas where trust in governing and health authorities was low and vaccine hesitancy high, faith institutions retained what we describe as social trust and cultural positioning to help authorities across Europe in making successful interventions. Finally, I want to refer you to a report which the all-party parliamentarian group did, incorporating many of the findings we at the Faith Forum, and I incorporated the Cities of Faith and Community Forum in that as well, that we found regarding faith and COVID and how important it was moving forward. And I just want to mention, and perhaps I'll refer to it later in questions if I get asked, but the pandemic, it said, it was a springboard for a rise in relationship between local authorities, faith communities and municipalities, and for existing relationships to be deepened. And one of the recommendations which they called for, and I'd like to point out here, was that the governments, local governments and major national governments should appoint a faith commissioner to promote and champion faith group collaborations with local authorities. And that we should establish a new faith advisory council in the UK to liaise between faith groups, central and local governments in order to help us contribute more fully to improve on Britain and a post-COVID UK in Britain. And I think that that's what I want. My message today is that we have a responsibility, and Cities of Faith and Community Forum would like to take that forward to ensure that we're not tokenistic. The faith contribution is critical going forward to ensure that we can have increased cohesion and that we can better support refugees and migrants and those seeking asylum in our countries to be more integrated, to be more understood, and to be supported fully so they in turn can be increase their civic participation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leonie, for your intervention there. A big round of applause for you there with a clear message. It is local, 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 and it is the participation that that you're touching on and how it actually can work out. An important reminder that we're in times of a pandemic and how it can make a difference to collaborate there as well. I think like a couple of recommendations were coming through like on your end, and I hope that this can be like addressed during the Q&A later on. But now I would like to hand over to Rehman Chishti, who is sitting here to my left. We're very glad and happy to have you, and we are indeed looking forward to intervention as well. Thank you so much.
Jonas, thank you so very much, and I'd say it's a real pleasure to be here with you all in Lisbon. Before I came to Lisbon, they all said, you know, Lisbon, the people of Lisbon have a big heart. And having been here and seen and integrated and been out and about, Lisbon does have a big heart and a wonderful country with amazing people who are very accepting. My pleasure. And Sheikh Moner to my left, and that's geographically to my left, I don't know if that's politically or not, has made a point, if I may say, as a parliamentarian. I am a British parliamentarian, 11 years in, 4 elections in with the grace of God, I've come in. And Sheikh Monero said, politicians come when there's elections. Well, I was brought up in a masjid. My father was an imam in Gillingham. My grandfather was an imam. And my uncles are imams. And so I understand the point you make, sir, with regards to the challenges with regards to engagement with faith communities consistently, not just at election time. But I do think across the board that the point about faith communities and the role they have in our society is absolutely crucial. So the questions that we have that I want to look at, the first one, which approaches to countering hate speech and building trust are working best? And you know, can I just say at the very outset, we have seen it in the United Kingdom over the last 4 days, what hatred does. As a parliamentarian, I lost a colleague, I lost a friend, we lost a dedicated public servant, you know, who lost his life serving his constituency in our democratic process because of extreme entities. More details are to come, but from what we hear, individual was driven by hate and intolerance and extremism. So the point that I say to all of us, and to us as parliamentarians, is with regards to hate and intolerance, each and every one of us has a responsibility with regards to how we counter intolerance. And I then start with that by the words of His Holiness, Pope Francis, with regards to the fraternity document and the statement he made in the United Arab Emirates. He said, Al-Azhar Sharif and Muslims of the East and the West, together with the Catholic Church and the Catholics of the East and the West, declared the adoption of a culture of dialogue as the path, mutual cooperation as the code of conduct, reciprocal understanding as the method of standard. That, my friends, is the way to address hate speech and intolerance. Because sadly, in my country, in the United Kingdom, in your country here in Portugal, in countries around the world, the United States, Germany, there is a culture where some individuals think it is okay to threaten, to harass, to intimidate, and sadly use violence against others if you do not agree with what they have to say. That is what we all, agreeing to the common good, have to counter. Linked to that, the problem that we have, and I have a private member's bill in Parliament going on Monday. Social media amplifies intolerance. It amplifies hatred under the cloak of anonymity. And therefore, the bill which I proposed in Parliament on Monday would be for the government to urge the social media companies, to get the social media companies to remove anonymity, check verification with regard to individuals who go online. I was a former member of the Homeland Security, Home Affairs Select Committee, looking at counter-terrorism and security, and having individuals come before us from social media, promising, urging, saying they'll do it, but it never gets done. So the government will need to take firm action. The government will propose legislation with a harms bill, but I will put forward a private member's bill on Monday and work with faith leaders and stakeholders around the world. So my point to you is this. You have to look at prevention with regards to attitudes. Attitudes is what we can all work together to improve with regards to some individuals and the counter-narrative. The point I say on this, I used to be the United Kingdom's Special Envoy for Religious Freedom or Belief based in the Foreign Office. And my counterparts was Ambassador Sam Brownback from the United States and Ambassador Josh Jomer from the Netherlands. Sam was the chairman, Josh and I were the vice chairman. And we had 32 member states on the alliance. COVID-19, intolerance against religious minorities around the world, India, Muslims were targeted under disinformation, Sri Lanka, cremations with regards to forced cremations against Muslims, unacceptable. And therefore we had the issues with the Hazara Shia community. They were targeted on that. We had the Kirkuk community in Iraq. They were targeted that with regards to the having the aid given to them and discrimination, social, economic, and social factors there as well. So my point on that leads me next to civil and political participation on these matters, which is so very important. Is a lot of these issues, with regards to how the government brings forward a strategy to deal with these issues, comes with regards to how parliamentarians raise these matters in government. And how parliamentarians raise these matters is with regards to taking interviews of their constituents. And therefore, for parliamentarians to be effective, they have to engage with all sections of their society or community. Whether they vote for you or not, I am still the member of parliament for all my constituents, 24 hours a day, and I will do that. We have a democratic system. How do we engage it? So I was speaking to Adam here from Voicify, from Europe, and he said to me, Rahman, we have a system where we give skills to migrants, to refugees, in terms of how to make representations to your member of parliament. If you know how to make representations, you know how to ask for your rights. If you know that, and then the same thing goes back in the United Kingdom. And I'm very grateful to Imam Ibrahim from Leicester, not just because he's from the United Kingdom, but he's a very good imam, for sharing with me the notes from yesterday's evening closing seminars. With regards to engagement, is a two-way process. Politicians have to reach out, but also you need society from across the board to reach back. It's a two-way process of engagement. And how do you address that with regards to migration and refugees? Because you have to give them the skill set to speak the language. If people can understand the language, then they can ask for to address health inequalities. They can know how to vote in the electoral process. Then they can ask those questions with regards to issues that matter to them. I finish on these 2 points. COVID-19, United Kingdom, 23rd of March, national lockdown coming in, government imposing legislation, with regards to the top priority, safety of our citizens. Completely agree with that. How do you take those measures? One, from a faith perspective, and I'm the former envoy for religious freedom, if the government's putting forward measures in these extreme circumstances, we accept difficult decisions have to be taken, but not cremation. When it comes to COVID-19, find other ways to address the issue of burials for faith communities. And the reason we did that, because members of the public were speaking to members of parliament, and then members of parliament were speaking to the executive, and therefore you have to give tools to the public to engage. And I, as a member of parliament, come from a faith background, father in imam, uncle in imam, and grandfather's relatives were imams. The point I say on this, I represent an 80% Christian constituency, and they elect me as their member of parliament. And that is about acceptance, respect, and tolerance towards one another. And that's how we need to move forward.
Thank you so much for your words. Indeed, a lot of important points that you have raised. And more than anything, like bringing up like what we have discussed over the last 2 days, and I'm looking forward maybe if Adam, who is like in the room with us like today in the Q&A, like to come in there, and maybe like some of us have also like been at the informal networking there. I'm also like pleased that Jake Mogra is like with us, and I hope that like we continue the conversations and the important points that our member of parliament has addressed now. Thank you so much again, it's really appreciated. Next, I would like to go with Marianne Verthoorn, President of the Board of Trustees, as mentioned already beforehand, of Multicolored Religions in Rotterdam, the Netherlands. We're very pleased to have you as well, and I hand over to you. Absolutely, please go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you. It is truly a pleasure for me and an honor to be here, so thanks to KAICIID also for inviting me. And I would like to share something from a Dutch perspective with you and my personal experience, and hopefully with that to offer you some inspiration. In doing so, I will be referring to some Dutch proverbs and poetry. Fear not, I will try to translate. For introduction, as it was already mentioned, I'm the chair of the Multicolored Religions Rotterdam Foundation. This is an interbelief organization promoting knowledge and understanding between people of various backgrounds. And our core business, you could say, is organizing visits for pupils and students, mainly to houses of worship, and have a dialogue there. So the synagogues, churches, mandirs, mosques, temples, the Gurdwara. In Rotterdam, which was for a long time the biggest poor town in the world and still is the biggest poor town in Europe now, you can make a religious world tour. I am also employed as this is my voluntary work actually, but I'm employed as a project leader at the Association of Dutch Municipalities, in which all Dutch municipalities work together on a broad range of policy issues and together take on advocacy towards national government. The job I'm working on there is promoting the inclusion of people with disabilities or chronic diseases based on the UN Convention for the Rights of People with Disabilities. I'm also a member of the Citizens Advisory Board for Mayor Abu Talib, the mayor of Rotterdam. I'm mentioning this because, you know, in a way you could say I'm both involved in policymaking and in faith communities. And I would like to focus on the third and the first question. So how can faith communities and local authorities improve collaboration, and which approaches to countering hate speech and building trust are working best? And I will do that in that order. So I will start with the third question. Maybe to give you an idea of the Dutch perspective, there are no recent, let's say, big conflicts like in some other parts of the world. But we also see a rise in hate speech and hate crimes. And especially international conflicts are somewhat important to tensions between groups in the Netherlands. Also, we see a rise in xenophobic discourse in mainstream politics with the rise of populist parties with a xenophobic discourse. Now, I think the starting point of all dialogue is to understand the other's perspective. So first seek to understand, then to be understood. And it's the same in engaging with local authorities. Local authorities are not a monolithic institution. I talked about politicians, but of course, the civil servants or public officials are also very important. And at least when I look at the Rotterdam context, many of them are not familiar with the reality of faith communities. So we have a job there to tell them how important it is. And in my experience, there are two things that are very important. One is the power of facts and figures. So, for example, how many communities are we talking about? What kind of organizations? How many citizens feel connected to it? And in Rotterdam, for example, there are about 600,000 inhabitants, and at least 1 in 3 of them have a religious affiliation. There are about 400 faith-based organizations. And as one alderman in Rotterdam once said, on a Sunday, there are still more people in church than in the Kuip. The Kuip, for your information, is the Feyenoord football stadium. So that is in Rotterdam, that is saying something. Also in Rotterdam, when we talk about facts and figures, just last year, a research was done into what was called the social added value of faith-based organizations. So actually taking the voluntary work in those organizations and translating that into euros. So what is it saving government, the work that they do? And a very conservative estimate of that was that it saves at least 195 million euros per year for local government, all the voluntary work that is done there. Now, these kinds of facts are eye-opening for policymakers. Of course, not everything is about money. I think the second way to engage is very important, is to cooperate and show what you do on concrete social issues. The pandemic, examples from the pandemic have already been mentioned, but also think about tackling poverty, fighting domestic violence, making neighborhoods greener, taking care of lonely elderly people, etc. The UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities I just mentioned has a core principle, and it's called nothing about us without us. This is an obligation for governments, for authorities, but it also means for us to letting our voices be heard. So we have a responsibility in that. Do not wait for the authorities, show yourself. By the way, I would like to note in that it's not just about religions, but it's also about beliefs. And so, for example, the humanist organizations are also involved. And I think that it's an important basic assumption, at least for me, that we all strive for what is good. Though we may differ on how we operationalize that, but not one of us has a monopoly on what is good and what are essential values. So which approaches to countering hate speech and building trust are working best? A lot has already been said about the necessity of monitoring and legislation, with the importance of which I support, but I would like to focus on prevention and the alternative narrative. If we see hate speech as a poisonous tree, we need to question in what kind of soil it can grow and blossom. And I think that soil is, on the one hand, are real social challenges people are facing, and they are looking for a culprit, if they are not giving an alternative discourse. I am convinced that the majority of people who vote for populist parties are not hardcore racists or xenophobes, but they have real concerns and often feel unheard and disappointed. That soil for that poisonous tree, in my view, is also distance, ignorance, and negative stereotypes. It's easier to hold negative stereotypes when you never meet the other, whoever that other is. And they may seem relatively innocent, but in the end, this is the soil, again, where hate speech can grow in. And this is where religious and political leaders play a key part in tackling negative stereotypes, promoting interaction and working together. Treat others as you would wish to be treated yourself as a principle, but also from a more pragmatic understanding, if one group is not safe, none of us are safe. And I would like to borrow here from our German neighbors. There's a famous poem from Martin Niemöller, and I tried to translate it. It says, when the Nazis arrested the communist, I was silent. After all, I was no communist. When they imprisoned the social democrats, I was silent. After all, I was no social democrat. When they came to get the union members, I did not protest. After all, I was not a union member. When they locked up the Jews, I did not protest. After all, I was no Jew. And when they came to get me, there was nobody left to protest. Building on this, I would like to say that solidarity is key. How do we speak about the other when he or she is not present? Do we speak up for each other? And that is very powerful if we do that, both towards each other and towards a broader society. So I believe that dialogue at various levels is necessary. There are some people like me who really enjoy getting together every month and talking about holy texts, for example. That's not for everyone. So there should be a dialogue with religious leaders, with practitioners. It can be about belief systems and shared values, but also on shared social challenges. And I would really encourage what I call the curbside level dialogue in neighborhoods, which is not about dogmatics, but about living together pleasantly. And for sustainable impact, these various levels should interact. So there is also a Dutch proverb, and I'm coming too close there, sorry, that says, trust comes by foot and it leaves by horse. So this means that time is of the essence. It means investing in relations on a structural, enduring basis. And this goes both between faith communities and among themselves, and also between faith communities and local authorities. So do not limit it or start when there is a crisis, but make it a structural priority. And then when there is any kind of crisis, you can quickly find each other and make a joint statement and de-escalate the situation. I'm going to go through it very quickly. Education is crucial. There is in Dutch law, there is an obligation for education to for active pluriformity in citizenship education, but we notice that a lot of schools do not know how to do that. So we can help them in practical ways. I would like to end by what is the alternative to hate speech? And maybe we should give more attention to that. Besides what we do not want, what do we want? Perhaps it is love speech. And what would that mean? I think just an attempt, maybe for a start, that it doesn't mean swiping under the carpet our differences, but acknowledging them and showing what it means to agree to disagree in a peaceful democratic society, choosing trust and speaking with each other and also speaking up for each other, stressing shared values and working on joint social challenges and showing solidarity in stressful situations. And really, my final words are again a poem from a famous Dutch poem from Henriette Roland Holst. She lived through both the world wars in the 20th century and was a member of the resistance in the Second World War. And her most famous poem, in translation at least, is that the gentle forces will certainly prevail in the end. This I hear like a fervent whisper within me. If it would go silent, all light would darken, all warmth would go rigid inside. The forces that still enchain love, she will gradually proceed and conquer. Then the great beatitude can commence, which we, if our hearts listen attentively, hear murmuring in all fondnesses, like the great sea in small shells. Love is the meaning of the life of the planets and of humans and animals. There is nothing which can interfere with rising to her. This is the certain knowing. To perfect love, everything rises along.
Thank you, Marianne. Beautiful. I think your message that you have brought to us is one of dialogue, addressing the ignorance, overcoming the stereotypes that are there, and enhance solidarity. And all of that, doing that through the means of dialogue. And I think in many ways, what you have communicated to us, you're an embodiment of such kind of like bridge building and dialogue as well. So thank you so much for the very important work that you are doing. Before we hand over to our last speaker of today, we'd just like to remind you that we're going to have our questions and answer sessions afterwards. So I'm very much looking forward to the questions on your end as well, so that we're going to have an active exchange as well. Without further ado, though, it's a real pleasure that we have Jasveer Singh with us from the Faith Forum for London and from the city Sikhs. Thank you so much for joining, and you have the floor. No, but no sound. Our tech team, please.
Maybe his end.
On his end. Can you unmute yourself, please? I'm told by our AV team that everything should be okay here in the room. I'm afraid we can still not hear you. I can hear your lips moving, but I can see your lips moving. I'm sure that it has worked beforehand when it was tested. I'm afraid not. And suggestion that I would make, and if you allow Jasveer Singh, is that it can be fixed in the meantime, and I would make a first round of questions and bring you in afterwards. Would that be okay with you? And I hope that in the meantime the technical difficulties can be fixed. Thank you for your understanding there. And I would like to hand over to you. We have two mics in the room. I think that we had very interesting and inspiring contributions from our speakers, and thanks again for that. And I would really hand over to you with questions that might be either directed to the entire floor or to a specific speaker. And I would suggest that we are collecting some 2-3 questions for a first round, and then we'll check again with Jaswir Singh as well if he can join us a little bit later. Please just try to signal by raising your hand if you have a question, a contribution, and to whom on our panel you want to direct it to. I can see Sheikh Mogra, you have the mic next to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to the panel for your very educational and beneficial contributions. I have a question for Marianne, if I may. I really like your approach about nothing about us without us, and that's critical. Many times we treat those we want to help as a monolithic block, and we provide them assistance which is not fit for purpose. Can you share us 2 examples, one of where things went horribly wrong and a lot of taxpayers' money was wasted, and one example where things were done right because the community that you are hoping to help was consulted on the ground?
It's an interesting question, thank you. An example of where I think it went wrong, and it may be a relatively small example, but during the month of Ramadan, there are regulations in the Netherlands, probably also in other countries, until what time you can be open as a sort of a public institution. So this goes for restaurants or hotels or etc. And but also there are some regulations also for houses of worship. But especially when Ramadan is in the summer months, of course, the latest prayer is very late in the evening, etc. So our mayor took the initiative to say, we will make an exception during that month. But what happened is that then there were some, for example, gambling places or bars, etc. And they said, oh, that's interesting. So if we just say that we are a mosque or anything, we can stay open longer as well. So they had to change this, and then they decided behind the desk that there would have to be sort of a proof of religious affiliation. And this was communicated towards the mosque 2 weeks before Ramadan started. And they had not thought about, what would be this proof. And so I think, and that's when we called them, and fortunately, we have close links to the city of Rotterdam saying, what were you thinking? So maybe if we would have tackled that beforehand, we could have together. So maybe not, tackled, maybe it's not a lot of waste of taxpayers' money, but still, it was inefficient, and it caused a lot of unrest, which was not necessary, in my opinion. I think an example of where it went right, when I would like to give 2, focusing on faith communities. I would like to stress again the importance, if the connections are already there, that you can be so effective in de-escalating situations and standing together. So, for example, after the terrorist attacks in Paris, it was 6 years ago, we could make a very strong statement very quickly, also together with local authorities, on that as a city together we stand against terrorism and extremism. And so I think that is a very strong and important message. But also, for example, there is a discussion in the Netherlands going on about possible legislation on limiting or even prohibiting foreign funding, as it is called. And also there on this really sort of technical policy issue, different faith-based organizations are working together in an early stage, so I think that's very important. But maybe to make it more practical, I was talking about, I didn't come up with this nothing about us without us. It's in the UN Convention for the Rights of People with Disabilities. And there you also see on a very practical, if there are bridges or a new building is designed, for example, and the architect does not take into account, so how will it be accessible to people with a disability, for example, in a wheelchair? Then they have to make the changes later on. And that's much more expensive than if they would take it on in the start. So.
Thank you so much. I can see another hand, like in the middle of the room, and I would like to hand over the floor to you. So I still don't have like the green light from our tech team to hand over to. Oh, I'm sorry. Like I actually just get the thumb up. So before we come to the next question, and I will hand over afterwards to you. It's a great pleasure that Jaswir Singh is with us, and we really hope that we can now hear you. Sorry for the technical problems there. You have the floor.
Not at all. I hope you can all hear me now. Thank you so much to everyone at KAICIID for the kind invitation to join you this afternoon. And my apologies for not being there in person in Portugal. I want to say a few words about how hate speech has, well, first of all, how to overcome some of the challenges that are presented by hate speech. But also, I think it's important for us to understand how hate speech can manifest itself, what it can involve, how it has an impact, and then try to present some practical ideas and solutions as to how it's possible to overcome them. So in the UK, there has been some recent research carried out by the UK Safer Internet Centre. They have reported that there has been a 225% increase in online hate speech incidents in the UK just over the past year. It's incredible to think that hate speech is still finding new ways of being heard, new ways of manifesting itself, new ways of impacting itself. And it's deeply frustrating to many of us, not just in the UK, but around the world, as to how to deal with the issues of hate speech, but also how to have the conversations which I feel are necessary if we are to overcome the challenges, overcome the reasons why hate speech exists in the first place. I want to give you some more statistics as well, because I think it's important to have those statistics at hand in order to truly understand what we are talking about in various areas. So I'm going to discuss this from a London perspective. In London, there have been lots of conversations recently about monuments, about statues, about diversity in the public sphere. What does it look like to have pieces of art or pieces of architecture which really speak to us as individuals and which allows us to then reflect upon what that means to us? Now, if we have a look at statues and public monuments in London in particular, 40%, the vast majority of those are dedicated to people from various generations, various centuries. But you have to also look at what the population of London looks like now. Now, London's population, over 40% of people who live in London are from a non-white background. They're what in the UK is described as being people of colour. But when you have a look at the public monuments that exist in London, less than 1% of them are dedicated to named people of colour. And in fact, London has more statues dedicated to animals than it does of named women. 8% of statues are dedicated to animals, 4% to women. And when you start seeing those as the figures and you start to understand that actually there's something wrong in the way that people engage with each other within the city of London, the way that people engage with each other and the pieces of art around them, then you start to understand some of the difficulties that may arise, which then manifests itself in the hate speech. Many people have said that some hate speech originates from ignorance. It originates from lack of integration. It originates from lack of understanding. I'd go further than that. I don't think this is about integration. I think integration is a term which, in my view, is historic. Integration for me isn't the word that we should be using. The word we should be using is celebrating diversity. We should be talking about why it's important for us to be authentic in ourselves, why we shouldn't feel the need to for everyone to look necessarily the same, have the exact same ideals, why we need to celebrate the fact that within any democratic system, there are always a diversity of opinions, and we respect that and we celebrate that. Likewise, we need to be able to do so when it comes to individuals, their identities, who they are, their sense of belonging. And I think more so as time goes on, does that become important. Let's talk specifically about faith. Faith links remain strong from a religious and cultural perspective for the vast majority of South Asians in the UK. And it's worth bearing in mind that the South Asian communities in the UK are the largest ethnic minority communities in the country. About 1 in every 20 people in the UK is of South Asian heritage. And we're a stronger community, well, a stronger community by way of numbers than the Black African and Black Caribbean communities are in the UK. But it's not always seen that way. We look at the moment, in the UK, we are marking Black History Month. Black History Month has been marked for about 34 years. South Asian Heritage Month is a month that I have co-led on, and that is a Heritage Month that runs in the summer each year. We're in the second year of South Asian Heritage Month, and we're about to get ready for next year, which will be year 3. Those sorts of practical ways of talking about identity have a real impact on how people then engage with those identities. South Asian Heritage Month talks about its motto. Its motto is celebrate, commemorate, educate. The idea of celebrating the identities of South Asians in the UK, including the religious aspects and the cultural aspects, commemorating the important dates in history, and then educating. And the education aspect is an important feature. Without having that education aspect, one can't expect societies to change or adapt. And there's a real importance to have inclusive decision making. And that means that you engage with communities in a practical way rather than a tokenistic way. We've already heard about visits taking place at election time to places of worship in order to engage with communities, and how many of those communities don't see that engagement at any other time during the election calendar. This is about going far beyond just engaging with communities at those points in time. This is about embedding a way of being and thinking about what it means to belong to a faith, but making it relevant to the day-to-day, making it relevant to the heritage, the awareness months, or other months that may exist throughout the year. And I think that's an important thing for us to bear in mind. One of the things that South Asian Heritage Month has achieved is this sense of there is diversity. I'm South Asian. There are Raman Chisti, the MP who spoke earlier, he's of South Asian heritage. There are many others who are South Asian in our heritage and identities. But it's a diverse sense of identity. I'm Sikh, Raman Chisti is a practicing Muslim. There are Hindus, there are Christians, there are Jains. All of those are important parts of our individual identities. But how do we make sure that people understand that? Now, one of the ways to do that is having pride in one's visible faith identity, be that the turban, be that the kippah, be that the hijab. That is important for us to think about, because I am a practicing barrister in the UK. I do court work, I go to court, I argue cases, I'm an advocate. Unfortunately, because I wear my turban, I wouldn't be able to practice in France. In France, the job is seen to be a state job. And because of the laïcité, which is practiced in France, it means that people who have any public roles cannot have articles of faith when they are working in that environment. If I was to work as a barrister, if I was to work as an advocate lawyer in France, I would have to take my turban off. And that you can start to see how that would have an impact on those who are from diverse communities, diverse faith backgrounds, who don't feel as though they're recognised or acknowledged by the state, but who need to have that support in order to be able to become more accepted more generally within those areas, within those regions, within those countries. Because if you don't have that recognition, then you lack that education. And if you don't have the faith literacy to understand the importance of different faiths, then hate speech will unfortunately thrive. That is why practical solutions such as Black History Month are important when it comes to racial and ethnic backgrounds and tackling hate speech. That's why South Asian Heritage Month is important in that respect, but also in respect of dealing with religious hatred, anti-religious hate speech. Other practical solutions include things that have been done by the Faith Forum for London as a means of bringing people together on social projects in a practical way. Tree planting was one of the ways in which various faith communities were coming together throughout London in order to ensure that there was that sense of community at an interfaith level, as well as providing a practical response from the faith communities to climate change. There is also the work that I am currently doing on the Commission for Diversity in the Public Realm in London, where community-led organisations are being invited to apply for grants to help deliver and develop projects which increase the diversity in London's public spaces. So it's about talking about those narratives, talking about the stories which haven't been spoken about, and making sure that the 40% of people in London who are from non-white backgrounds have more than just 1% of public monuments which are dedicated to them. There are many practical solutions which are out there. There is much guidance that can be sought from cities that are doing well, and I'm sure that London could learn so much from other cities, just as other cities can learn from London. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your intervention there. A big round of applause for you as well. And I think we can also take the time to applaud to all 5 of our speakers. You have done a marvelous job. You have presented to us how participation can work on the local level, and we've seen 3 very concrete examples coming from the UK and from the Netherlands. Sheikh Munir has presented to us how it can work as a religious leader to open doors and to be welcoming. And of course, our MP from the United Kingdom, Rehman Chishti, has shown what the national level can contribute in order to enable such kind of participation in the first place as well. We have started with the first question already. We had one person who was raising the hand and would like to hand over to you, and afterwards read a question that was sent through from one of our virtual participants as well. You have the floor.
Thank you. I'm Abdirahim. I am from Finland. I lead Finland's largest multicultural organization of over 40 different nationalities and about 120 of them. According to statistics, almost all of Europe is getting old. Like when we talk about native Europeans, everywhere else around the world, people are much younger, growing. Within the European community, we are also getting migrants are like the youth that is growing. We also have a lot of diverse within the migrants. The phrase that has been used earlier today, nothing for us without us, I remember that was used for certain people, but it's used now for almost all minorities. The question I have, and the point I would like to bring out here today, is that within that us, because that us consists of almost all the minorities, in that box, there's a lot of division between us. There's a lot of hatred between us. There's a lot of really looking down at one another, also that one. That is kind of a hate speech. The only difference now is that in that box of the us, we still don't have the power to change other people's life that much. But because Europe is getting old, positions will be filled later in the coming years. When this happens, those hate speech between those minorities will also become into practice. It will be used against one another. Do you guys on the panels, do you think that this is something we need to address? We need to talk about it now. We need to open it up, because even though it doesn't have a lot of power, but it will get power, and it is getting power day by day. We see this also from our organization background where, for example, in the election times, you will see different background migrants really saying no to other groups just because of the color of their skin or because of the religion and stuff like that. Also that it is racism, it's xenophobia and so many other. So do you think that should also be discussed? And to what extent can it be brought to this kind of discussions when we talk about hate speech? Thank you.
Thank you so much for this really critical question that is coming there, including some applause that is coming through. The question of demography is indeed like an important one, and how minorities can address it. We have a question coming in from Rabbi Moshe HaKohen from Malmö in Sweden, and he's part of Amana, the Muslim-Jewish partnership there, and he has a reflection for the panel. He's saying many times the basis is about multi-faith collaboration. Could there be a benefit in unique collaborations in standing up for one another between specific groups? I presume that he is specifically there, like in mind, the Jewish-Muslim collaboration there and standing up for each other in cases of incidents of Islamophobia, anti-Muslim hatred, respectively anti-Semitism. But I guess like it would be like very much true for any kind of attack like on Sikhs or other faith groups, of course, as well. I would be open like to a third question as well, and I can see first like Amjad here in the middle, and we come then like to a second round as well. But as a matter of fact, we have heard from two men so far. Maybe like actually it will be good that like we hear Anna first, in order like to have like some gender balance there as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you all for this. I couldn't avoid thinking, because I come from Greece, and I would like to ask you, what about the systemic hate speech that we are experiencing? Maybe this is the most, this is sabotaging the whole process or effort to involve the civic the participation and be more inclusive. When we have in the parliament inside people who are having a blunt hate speech against not only the refugees and the migrants, but as the weakest link, you can hear it. When you can see reproduced in the mainstream media, not some extreme media or some populist. And I'm wondering, even from the universities, even from municipalities, from mayors, you can hear this systemic hate speech. So I'm wondering if the systemic hate speech is not eliminated in this level, how can you, spread by the populism, how can you create a strategy, a systemic strategy against it? And this is something that is always in my mind. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that very important question as well, of like how that systemic aspect can be kept in mind there. I can see two more hands or two questions who want to come to the table as well, which means that like for the remainder of our time, we'd like to ask now like our panelists to take up one of those questions, and I would go through the same order as you have intervened beforehand, and you may want to focus maybe like one of the question each that that have been addressed to you. Sheikh Munir, I would start with you. Would you pick up one of those three questions that that were asked? Thank you so much.
Concerning the place where I am, in the country where I am, as I told you, we don't have hate speech in the parliament. We don't have in the media. What sometimes happens is there in the social media, in some platforms, people may mix things which happens, for example, in an Islamic country, and they say that all of them are equal. As I told you that in the beginning, the Islamic community of Lisbon or Islamic community of Portugal, since beginning, we came from, as I told you, 1968 when it was founded. We culturally are Portuguese. Our background culturally, okay? Even though we came from Africa and it was colonized, okay? But it is there in the end. When we see someone, now that is the point, when we see someone saying something about Islam or saying something about Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, especially a cartoonist, or we didn't have anyone like that, but if anyone says some, give a bad image, So we don't react emotionally, okay? We try to react rationally, okay? We try to call him if it is possible, or we try to respond in a way that if he said something about the Prophet, we say about how the Prophet reacted. We speak about him. We had 1 or 2 cases in our country, and we didn't make a big scale of it, because if we made, then it will become a bestseller. In some, you see, the other advantage which we have till now in Portugal, we don't have ghettos. We don't have any local or any place where we can say that the Arabs are living there, the Indians are living there, the Africans are living there. We are all in the society. Okay. Now, the third point, which when I say that the politicians, they visit the mosque before the elections, after the election, we invite them to come and visit us, okay? So till now, we can say that the environment in Portugal, the whole Portugal, we may say that with refugees, with immigrants, with Muslims, with Jewish, with non-Catholic, you may say that, it is an example. Till when? God knows the best.
Thank you so much, Sheikh Munir, for that. Having in mind that we want to do a second round, I would like to ask all speakers to be around a 1 minute intervention in your answers in order to allow for another round of questions there. Thank you so much for having that in mind. I hand over to Leonie Lewis in the UK, who is joining us virtually.
Thank you very much. And the questions were very appropriate and very challenging. I want to perhaps address 2 simple points. One is that I think that we have seen that people generally, something that threatens everybody, such as the pandemic, can give rise to people doing good. People want to contribute and make a better world for us all, but it also gives rise to people who want to find fault, anti-vaxxers, people who are against the pandemic and say it's a conspiracy, and we have to contend with these. But there are a couple of things which are happening because of that. Young people, we've seen through my main work is in the voluntary sector, have come in droves in the UK, and I'm sure it's across Europe, to support the elderly, the isolated, and people more alone in the world, and people with mental health challenges. And they want to make good, they want to do something. And many of those young people are from churches and places of worship, Muslim young people, and across different faiths and religions. I'm Jewish, and I've seen it with many synagogues here, that the young people, when the synagogues were closed, were out delivering food, were out helping to organize, drive cars, and take things around. I think that often we get hung up very much in dialogical and dialogue arguments and discussions. For me, it's very much that we can work together to help resolve some of these challenges. And I've seen this also with refugees who I'm working with. Ask them to get engaged to help us all working together. Provide projects. Jasmine talked about the tree planting, but there are many, many social action projects where people can come together and work together for the good of everybody. Building a playground, keeping the park clean, tidying the roads, and everyone's seeing this together. And this happens a lot through places of worship coming together, joining forces. Young people don't want to sit at a committee. They want to have some degree of social action and intervention. And I think that the faith groups can do this very well. And my last point, and I won't need to come back again, is that there are several youth programs of different interfaith charities, youth boards. The CFCF are putting together a potential student leadership program which will take place from November through to March, where 4 different academic institutions, and it's a pilot, so we'd love to have more, will come together to understand the needs of one another, the needs of different faiths and how they can work and collaborate, but more importantly, how their intervention can help with local city halls, municipalities, so that they can become themselves key leaders to promote good interfaith relations, and I'm not just talking about having a bagel or a samosa together, but actually doing something meaningful and helping change policies at a local level. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leonie, for that and bringing in like this aspect of volunteering, which I guess is like critical for participation there as well. Rehman Chishti, I hand over to you.
Yeah, can I just echo what Leonie said and others have said before? But I think the question is, we talk about hate speech, but before we get to hate speech, it's what each and every one of us says. And the problem I say, the issue I make with that is this. We saw within the United Kingdom extremists, both from the far right and Daesh-inspired extremists. So whether it was Toby Robinson or whether it was Anjuman Chowdhury, they both fed off each other in their poison narrative. And they both stopped short of breaching the law, but their poison narrative sucked in vulnerable, disillusioned individuals to their poison ideology. So therefore, in every society, a time comes when we all have to step back and say and reflect, what next? And we in the United Kingdom are having that moment now. In the last 5 years, we've lost 2 members of parliament, killed, doing their job, serving their country and their communities. And therefore, what we, each and every one of us, and I think the lady there raised it, is with regards to how politicians behave and interact within the chamber. If now we can't look and address the issue of civility and respect, and with regards to how we engage, of course there's sensitive issues. Of course have the firmest debate possible, but you have it with respect and civility. And therefore what I would say is, underlying all that for individuals of all faith, and then we've talked about interfaith, but there's also the issue of intrafaith. And the question that comes up, and I say this, and it was said by Pope Francis again, in the name of God, who has created all human beings equal in rights, duties, and dignity, and who has called them to live together as brothers and sisters, to fill the earth and make known the values of goodness, love, and peace. If we start with the concept about human dignity to start with, and therefore, if I could just finish on this, if colleagues have not read the document, and that's the Foreign Office's document, Wilton Park Report, Tackling Violence Committed in the Name of Religion, which says every religious leader is called to unmask any attempt to manipulate God for ends that have nothing to do with him or his glory. There is a need then for a common commitment on the part of political authorities, religious leaders, teachers, and those engaged in the fields of education, training, and communications to warn all those tempted by perverse forms of misguided religiosity, and these have nothing to do with the profession of a religion worthy of his name. And that ties into what Leonie was saying, when you have misinformation, you have disinformation, individuals starting saying you have one identity. And I say, for me as a British parliamentarian, I'm proud to be a Muslim. I'm proud to be British. I'm proud of my British Pakistani heritage. And apart from being a elected parliamentarian, I'm proud to serve my country in the armed forces. You can have all. Why do you have to have one?
Thank you very much for this very powerful statement. Appreciate it. I hand over to Marianne. I also recognize that we are running out of time and the coffee break would start, but I think we're in a very engaged discussion here, and therefore I would suggest that we continue for another 7 minutes or so in order to allow for another round of questions. Marianne, I hand over to you.
Thank you. I would like to address the question of the gentleman about negative stereotypes and hate speech within communities and between different sort of minority communities. And I think it's absolutely essential that we address that as well. You cannot do one, which is, promoting peace and dialogue to broader society without doing the other. It's not credible, if you don't do that within your own communities and between communities. So that's absolutely essential. That's why, people like us who are involved in this kind of work, you never have to worry about having nothing to do, because there's always a lot of work to do. And I think I would like to suggest 2 main approaches for that. I think that the human rights perspective is very important. And I addressed it in my intervention, saying that one is a principle that you treat others as you would like to be treated yourself. But it's also a very pragmatic approach, and making people understand, again, that if group is not safe, in the end, no one is safe. And I think that's a very basic understanding that is important for this. And the other is basically what Leonie also was talking about, and others, is what I would like to call diapraxis. So we talk about dialogue through the word, but diapraxis is through acting, doing things together for the common good. I think, like I said, not everyone, I consider myself somewhat of a dialogue tiger, and I sometimes feel I've been doing this for a century maybe, and I'm very glad to do this. But, that's not for everyone, but I think everyone in neighborhoods together want to come together for the common good. And that's through acting that we then discover shared values. So I think these are two important approaches in this. And also in stressing that there was talk about religious literacy, I think it was called this morning. And I do believe that, I have nothing against promoting knowledge about different beliefs and religions. I mean, I love it myself. But the risk with knowledge is that it's always contextual, and there's a risk in saying, oh, so now I understand Islam, you are a Muslim, so I understand you. No, it's not like that. I mean, we meet individuals, right? It's about meeting individuals. So I would like to stress, again, nothing against knowledge, but skills of empathy, of dialogue. And I think that is what we should also address also within our own communities.
Thank you so much, Marianne. A well-deserved applause for you there as well. Indeed, the persistence and the sustainability of such kind of dialogues are critical. I hand over to you, Jaswir Singh, to address one of the questions that came from the audience in a minute, if possible. Thank you.
Of course. So I'm going to address the issue of systemic hate speech and how to deal with that. And I'll give bullet points to make it quite short. I would say push for recognition, but do that with respect and civility, as has been stressed by Rehman Chisti. Respond with compassion. I think you need to understand that even with systemic hate speech, you need to do so from a place of compassion and understanding, but you can still be robust in your challenging it. Self-organize. Self-organizing is perhaps the most important feature. It's about getting together like-minded individuals, people who can then help you pull together a campaign, people who can help you push forward your message, your narrative, and keep it authentic. It's important to get allies. Make sure you have allies who can support you when you are trying to achieve this. Importantly, encourage the younger generation to develop their own ideas and see whether those ideas are ones which you can run with. Give that space to the younger generation, because they may well be able to think of ways to engage that you can't. They may think of other social media platforms that you can use. And then finally, reach out to others who have influence and ask them to support your cause. Influences on places like TikTok or on Instagram are immense. Sometimes those influences have more of an impact on how much an issue is spoken about than countless debates, countless discussions. And I'm just going to end with the words of the 10th Sikh Guru, Guru Gobind Singh Ji. He said, Manas ki jaat sabe eke pechanbo. Recognize the whole of humanity as one.
Thank you so much, Jaswir, also on your end for that. I recognize that there are 3 more questions in the room. And first it is Amjad, then Adam, and then I've also seen Amina, and then also next to Amina, a 4th question. I would prepare our speakers afterwards to have a 30 seconds respond and a closing round then as well. And unfortunately, Sheikh Munir needed to leave us for another meeting. He's sending his apologies for that. Amjad, you have the floor.
Great, thank you very much. Just one of the things that I think that we often have difficulty in is the fact that faith communities are seen as monolithic, right? So we engage with the faith community. We go to the mosque or the church or the synagogue, Gurdwara, and we're engaging with the community. But what has been said repeatedly over the last few days is the concept of intersectionality. And so I think I'm a bit curious as to how we can break those silos, because the same communities or the same young people that we're engaging with, the same communities, they also have there are other organizations that are also working. And so far, I haven't heard anything today about bridging those gaps. And I'd be very curious to hear more about that, because I think that's an important component of what is often, as Marianne said, a very personal lived experience. So, it's very difficult for someone to go to a mosque and sort of say, well, I'm being represented, because they may not be, but they may be still going to the mosque. So I think I'd be curious to kind of hear some examples or hear some strategy about how we could break those silos.
Thank you, Amjad, for those questions. I'm not sure if our speakers will be able to address that in 30 seconds. However, it will be an important one that we can keep in mind for the research paper and the input paper that is there. Adam would be the next person who was raising his hand.
Thank you for all speakers. I'll be quick. It's just a note that I haven't heard much during the conference about the role of the climate crisis that we are living today in displacing people, and how this will, in few years, will make the whole topic of migration and refugees a daily reality for everyone on Earth. We are talking about tens of millions who will be displaced. We know that. We have plenty of scientific evidence. I'm interested to know how this will be placed or is placed in the debate about migration, especially on the level of cities and local authorities.
Thank you so much, Adam, for that. I hand over to Amina. The mic would be next to you.
Thank you. Mr. Rahman, like yourself, I'm pleased to say that I'm a proud British Muslim. I'm deeply concerned by the growing threats and hate speech towards the Muslim minority community after the killing of our MP. The despicable, brutal act of the young man who has killed our prominent and respectful MP completely violated the Islamic law and norms, may I say, and the perpetrator is no way representative of the Muslim people or the religion of Islam. The Almighty God upholds the sanctity of life as a universal principle. In the Quran, it clearly says, whoever kills another innocent human being shall be as if he has killed all mankind. And whoever saves the life of one person is as if he has saved the whole of mankind. There has been anecdotal evidence of threats against some British Somalis since the tragic incident. So how do we, as members of the local community, respond to what's going on the ground as we speak?
Thank you for that. A very important reminder there as well. And the last question to the colleague.
My name is Syed Asnain. I'm a refugee from Afghanistan, president of UNIRE, Italian National Union of Refugees and Exiles. So my question is to Mr. Rahman Chishti. In Italy, we have a very specific and a very paternalistic approach from political parties and policymakers in Italy, especially on national level. We had a meeting with one of member of Italian National Parliament, and when we spoke about political participation of minorities like us refugees, he said, no, this topic is more concerning second generation people in Italy, because they are born here, they are grew here, and they have all cultural aspect of Italy, but refugees, they are newcomers, so we cannot speak about political participation of them. So my question is that from perspective of UK, where communities, they have more possibilities and opportunities to be engaged politically, how we can change this mindset in Italian national context? Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this important question related to Italy there as well. I recognize that these are all very important questions that will not be able to be answered in 30 seconds. My proposal is, as a consequence, that maybe like these questions can be resolved in bilaterals afterwards, and we rather maybe like have closing statements in general from the four of you, if you kindly agree to that approach. And this time around, I would start from Mr. Jasveer Singh and continuing then with the reverse list as we started.
So in closing, I would say this. We have a lot to deal with when it comes to hate speech. The statistics are stark. The data is frightening at times, but we need to have hope. Because if we don't have hope, then we have no opportunity to change what we see in the world. Hate speech has been around for millennia. It's just that we are more willing in many respects to confront it, whereas in previous generations, we have been scared to do so. We also have more skills available, more means available to tackle it, but we also need to be able to work together. Now, this is the European Policy Dialogue Forum. We need to have a European-wide approach. We need to be willing to reach out to people, say, all across the continent of Europe in order to see how they can help in any of the hate speech issues which are arising. That's partly the purpose of this particular conference. And I hope that this conference can help develop such means of networking, such means of discussing issues, that this can continue in the future, because we all have much to learn from each other. I've given some examples which have been successful in the UK. They may not work in Italy, they may not work in Greece, they may not work in Poland. But that doesn't mean to say that there aren't other things that could work, and vice versa. So I think hope, ambition, and aspiration are the things that I would be asking you to leave with. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and for the important reminder of what the European Policy Dialogue Forum is indeed about, as you're outlining. I hand over to Marianne for her 30 seconds closing statement.
30 seconds, okay. Then two things I would like to end with. Jasper was saying previously something about compassion. I think compassion is really key here, and also to understand that people are engaged in hate speech. My grandmother used to say, you know, people who act badly, usually they feel badly. So I hope that's a good translation. But I think compassion there is also, it's not about giving an excuse for hate speech, but really looking at real concerns, real needs, real problems that people are facing, and how can we challenge them together. And I would like to conclude with saying, you know, we talked about dialogue, and if you ask me, also diapraxis between faith communities and local authorities, between communities themselves, within communities. In the end, there can be no peace in the world if there is no peace in our heart. So let me conclude by saying that we always have to keep looking within our own hearts as well.
Indeed, an important reminder that we are starting from ourselves in order to provide change on a systemic level. Thank you so much for that, Marianne. I hand over to you, Rehman.
Certainly. Can I just answer the first question with brevity? Amjad asked with regards to intersectionality and freedom of religion or belief. With regards to a really good paper on that is Professor Maurice Tadros, who is the director of KAICIID, Coalition for Religious Inequality and Development, and she covers the issue of social exclusion and economic exclusion and the issue challenges with regards to gender. And I know she's brilliant because when I was the British envoy, I used to read their reports, and there are a number of reports on that specific issue. With regards to the issue on Italy, I'm not an expert on the Italian political system, but I would say this: whether you're in Italy or whether you're in the United Kingdom or Pakistan or France, you know, we are all human beings, and we should start with the concept of human dignity and respect for all. And with regards to how we come to finding those solutions, we should always have at the forefront that very concept. I came to the United Kingdom at the age of 6, did not speak a word of English. Little did I know, many years down the line, I'd be representing my home constituency as a son of an imam with an 80% Christian community. I mean, you're absolutely right. The issue with regards to intolerance and hate in the United Kingdom in the last year, there was 124,000 reported hate incidents. And if you break them down into faith, they were mostly with regards to anti-Muslim and anti-Jewish hatred. And therefore, each and every one of us working with the government has a moral responsibility to do everything we can to address that issue of intolerance. Nobody has a right to spread hate and intolerance against another human being. Humanity and dignity. And I finish with this. I'm a son of an imam, but I read a lot from all faiths. And I want to give you this quote from John Henry Newman, who was a British saint who was canonized in 2019. And this is what he says, and I think it's very pertinent to finish on this from my point. He said this: "Let us be meek and gentle. Let us think before we speak. Let us try to improve our tenets. In private life, let us do good, not hoping for a return, and avoiding all display before men." I.e., let's all try to be graceful, give without any expectation of any return. Thank you.
Thank you so much. A very beautiful quote indeed. Last but not least, I hand over to Leonie Lewis. 30 seconds if you can, please.
Thank you very much. I just want to say two quick responses. One is that the climate of the world and our environment is something that affects every one of us, from our head and our heart. And I think that young people particularly have been driving forward an agenda to help governments, local and national, to change their views. Faith does have something very much to say about stewardship of our world. For those of you who are able to join in the conference online or next week and the next 2 weeks, we do have various faith responses. The CFCF will be running a session, particularly looking at humanitarian crisis and its effects on climate and its effects on the humanitarian situation. So please do join us for that. And my last quote, because I'm going to quote now because everybody else seems to, and I've got the bug from Marianne, and our MP, who I thought was very appropriate. There's a famous rabbi in Jewish tradition, Rabbi Hillel, and he says, and this affects us both in faith and climate, and of course, the situation of hate crime. It's also our responsibility to respond. He said, "If I'm only for myself, what am I? If not now, when?" Thank you.
Thank you so much for that important call as well. Indeed, climate change has come up now like a couple of times. And while our focus is on social cohesion, we do recognize that there's, of course, a lot of interlinkages as well. Thank you so much to the four of you. I recognize that the next session is going to start in some 12 minutes, and you may need some coffee and dessert, so I'm not going to hold you any longer. I just would like to ask the four speakers to give them a great round of applause. It was very interesting. Thank you so much for being with us.